The freezing rain cut through the November air like shards of glass, and Victoria Owens knew she was being foolish. But the woodpile was nearly empty and winter in Angel's Camp. California showed no mercy to the unprepared. Her fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago, wrapped around the axe handle as she brought it down again and again on the stubborn oak logs. The year was 1882, and she had been alone on this small homestead for 3 months now, ever since her father had died from pneumonia. At 22 years old, she was determined to prove she could survive without accepting charity from the neighbors who whispered that a woman alone had no business trying to work a claim in the Sierra Nevada foothills. The rain soaked through her wool coat, plastering her dark hair to her face as she lifted the axe once more, her arms trembling with exhaustion. She did not hear the horse approaching through the storm until a deep voice cut through the sound of rain hammering against the frozen ground. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" Victoria spun around, nearly losing her grip on the axe. A man sat astride a large bay horse, his wide-brimmed hat doing little to shield his face from the icy downpour. Even through the rain, she could see the sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes, and the way his shoulders filled out his heavy duster coat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the muddy ground with purpose. "I am chopping wood," Victoria said, lifting her chin despite the way her teeth chattered. "Which is my own business." "Not when you are about to collapse from cold," the stranger said, his voice rough with something between anger and concern. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and held out his gloved hand. "Give me the axe." "I do not need your help," Victoria protested, but her words came out weak, undermined by the violent shivering that had taken hold of her body. The man did not argue. He simply took the axe from her trembling hands with a gentleness that contradicted the hard set of his mouth. "Get inside right now," he said, his tone brooking no argument, "before you catch your death out here." Something in his voice, a combination of command and genuine worry, broke through Victoria's stubborn pride. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, and the warmth of a fire suddenly seemed more important than proving her independence to a stranger. She stumbled toward the small cabin, her frozen feet barely cooperating, and she felt rather than saw the man follow her with his eyes before he turned to his horse. Inside the cabin, Victoria's hands shook so badly she could not work the buttons of her soaked coat. She stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, frustration and exhaustion bringing tears to her eyes. The door opened, and the stranger entered, bringing a gust of cold air and rain with him. He had left his horse under the small overhang that served as a makeshift stable beside the cabin. "Let me," he said quietly, and before Victoria could protest, he was helping her out of the heavy wet coat, his movements efficient and respectful. He hung it near the stove, then turned to assess the cabin with a practiced eye. The fire in the stove had burned low, and he immediately set about building it back up, his movements sure and capable. Victoria sank into the single wooden chair by the small table, watching him work through a haze of cold and confusion. Now that she could see him properly in the dim light of the cabin, she realized he was younger than his authoritative manner suggested, perhaps 28 or 29. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, damp from the rain, and his profile showed a strong nose and firm mouth set in concentration as he coaxed the fire to life. "There are blankets on the bed," he said without turning around. "You need to get out of those wet clothes and wrap up warm." "I will keep my back turned." The practical command in his voice left no room for modesty or argument. Victoria's fingers fumbled with her wet dress, and she finally managed to strip down to her chemise before wrapping herself in the 2 quilts from her narrow bed. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender, a reminder of when her mother had still been alive, before the fever had taken her 5 years ago. "I am decent," she managed to say, and the stranger turned around. His eyes swept over her, checking for signs of frostbite or hypothermia with what seemed like experienced concern. "Nathan Parker," he said, holding out his hand. "I have the ranch about 5 miles west of here, up near the ridge." Victoria knew the place he meant, a substantial spread that ran cattle and had a reputation for being well managed. She had never met the owner, having only moved to this small claim with her father the previous spring. She took his offered hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip even through the blanket she had wrapped around herself. "Victoria Owens," she said. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Parker, though I assure you I was managing fine." "You were about to collapse," Nathan said bluntly, pulling the other chair closer to the stove and gesturing for her to sit in it. "When did you last eat?" The question caught Victoria off guard. She tried to remember and realized with some embarrassment that she had only had weak coffee and a piece of hard bread that morning. "I have been busy," she said defensively. Nathan made a sound that might have been disapproval or understanding. She could not tell which. He moved to the small shelf that served as her pantry and began pulling down items with the familiarity of someone who knew his way around a kitchen. Victoria wanted to object, to tell him she could take care of herself, but the warmth from the stove was finally reaching her frozen limbs, and she felt boneless with exhaustion. "I heard Samuel Owens passed," Nathan said as he worked, his back to her as he set a pot on the stove. "I am sorry for your loss. He was a good man." The simple condolence, delivered without flowery sentiment, touched something in Victoria's chest. "You knew my father, met him a few times in town. He helped me track down a bull that had broken through my fence last summer." Nathan's hands moved with practiced ease, adding water to the pot, then digging out the small amount of salt pork and beans Victoria had left. "He talked about you, said you were stubborn as a mule and twice as smart." Despite everything, Victoria felt a smile tug at her lips. That sounded exactly like something her father would have said. He was not wrong about the stubborn part. "I gathered that when I found you half frozen and still swinging an axe." Nathan glanced over his shoulder, and Victoria saw something that might have been amusement in his dark eyes. "The question is whether he was right about the smart part too. A smart woman would have asked for help before things got desperate." The words stung because they were true, but Victoria's pride flared anyway. "I do not need charity. I can work this claim myself." "It is not about charity," Nathan said, turning to face her fully. "It is about survival. This is hard country, Miss Owens. Men twice your size struggle to make it through a Sierra winter alone. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it." "There is when everyone is waiting for you to fail," Victoria said, the words coming out more bitter than she intended. "When they are all watching to see how long it takes before you give up and sell out." Nathan was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her aware of how she must look, wrapped in quilts with her hair hanging in wet tangles around her face. "Is that what you think I am doing? Waiting for you to fail so I can buy your land?" The thought had not occurred to Victoria until he said it, but now suspicion crept in. Her small claim sat on good water, something that would be valuable to a rancher. "Are you?" "No." The single word was spoken with such flat honesty that Victoria found herself believing him. "I have enough land and enough problems without taking on more. I stopped because I saw someone in trouble and I was raised not to ride past that, no matter who it is." Shame heated Victoria's cheeks. "I apologize. That was unfair of me, but understandable." Nathan turned back to the stove, stirring the simple stew he was making. "You have had people pressuring you to sell, I imagine." "Tom Hendricks has been by 3 times," Victoria admitted. "Tom Hendricks owned the mercantile in town and had his fingers in various land deals. He says he has a buyer who would give me a fair price. Says I could move to Sacramento, start fresh somewhere that is not so hard." "And what do you say?" Victoria pulled the quilts tighter around herself. "I say this is my land. My father worked himself into the ground to prove up this claim, and I will not let it go just because it is hard. He wanted me to have something of my own, a place that could not be taken away." Nathan nodded slowly, and Victoria had the sense that he understood more than she had said. "Then you need to be smarter about it. You cannot chop wood in freezing rain until you drop. You cannot skip meals because you are too busy to eat. All that does is guarantee you will get sick or hurt, and then you will lose the land anyway." The truth of his words settled over Victoria like a weight. She had been so focused on proving she did not need anyone that she had been working herself toward collapse. "I know," she said quietly. "I just do not know how to do everything that needs doing. My father handled so much, and I did not realize until he was gone just how much." "That is why people help each other out here," Nathan said. He ladled the stew into a bowl and brought it to her, the simple food smelling like the best thing Victoria had ever encountered. "Not charity, trade. I help you get your woodpile chopped and stacked. You mend that tear in my coat. You need help fixing your fence line come spring. I send over a couple of my hands, and you send over bread or preserves or whatever you have extra. That is how folks survive in this country." Victoria took the bowl with hands that had finally stopped shaking quite so badly. The warmth of the food seeped into her palms, and she felt tears prick at her eyes again. She blinked them back fiercely, not wanting to cry in front of this stranger who had shown her more practical kindness in an hour than anyone had in months. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Truly." Nathan settled into the other chair, his long legs stretched toward the stove. He was quiet for a moment, and Victoria thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My mother tried to keep our ranch going after my father died. I was 15, too young to do everything that needed doing and too proud to ask for help. She worked herself sick trying to prove she could manage alone. By the time I was old enough to really help, the damage was done. She lived 2 more years, but she never really recovered her health." The pain in his voice was old but still sharp, and Victoria felt her heart constrict with sympathy. "I am sorry. So am I." Nathan met her eyes, and Victoria saw understanding there, and something else she could not quite name. "So when I see someone else being too stubborn and proud to ask for help, especially when they are going to work themselves into the ground over it, I figure I owe it to my mother's memory to intervene." Victoria ate her stew slowly, letting the warmth spread through her body as she processed his words. Outside, the freezing rain continued to hammer against the cabin walls, but inside, the stove radiated heat, and for the first time in weeks, Victoria did not feel quite so alone. "What happened to your ranch?" she asked. "After your mother passed, I kept it going," Nathan said simply. "Took on debt, worked jobs on the side, did whatever I had to do, paid it all off 3 years ago. Now I run about 300 head of cattle and 30 horses. It is a good life, but it took a long time to get here. You must have been young when you took it all on. 21 when my mother died, old enough to make my own mistakes, young enough to still think I knew everything." A hint of self-deprecating humor colored his voice. "I learned fast, though. This country does not give you much choice about that." They fell into a comfortable silence as Victoria finished her food. The warmth and nourishment were working wonders, bringing feeling back to her extremities and clearing the fog from her mind. She became acutely aware that she was sitting with a strange man while wearing only her undergarments and some blankets. But Nathan's manner was so matter-of-fact and respectful that she found it hard to feel truly uncomfortable. He stared into the stove, apparently lost in his own thoughts, giving her space without leaving her alone. "I should check on my horse," Nathan said eventually, rising to his feet. "The rain sounds like it might be letting up a bit. I will finish chopping that wood before I head out." "You do not have to do that," Victoria protested. "You have already done so much." Nathan fixed her with a look that was both stern and somehow fond. "Miss Owens, you are not going back out in this weather today, which means you need wood to keep this fire going through the night." "I am finishing the chopping." "That is not a discussion." Before Victoria could argue, he had shrugged back into his duster and stepped out into the cold. She sat wrapped in her quilts, listening to the rhythmic sound of the axe biting into wood. The sound was steady and sure, so different from her own exhausted, erratic chopping. She thought about what he had said about trade and community, about how survival here meant accepting help while still maintaining your dignity. Victoria rose and moved to her small trunk, pulling out dry clothes. She dressed quickly in the warmth of the stove, then set about making coffee with the last of her beans. By the time Nathan came back inside, his arms loaded with firewood, she had a pot brewing and had laid his coat near the stove to dry. "Your woodpile is done," Nathan said, stacking the logs neatly by the stove. "Should last you a good week if you are careful with it. After that, you need to get more cut before the next storm hits." "I will," Victoria promised. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed him one. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. Truly, I was being foolish out there." "Nathan," he said, accepting the cup. "And you were not foolish, just desperate. There is a difference." He took a sip of the weak coffee and did not comment on its quality, which Victoria appreciated. "What are your plans for the winter? Do you have enough supplies laid in?" The question made Victoria's stomach tighten with anxiety. The truth was, she did not have nearly enough. Her father's illness had eaten up the last of their savings, and she had been rationing what little she had left. But admitting that felt like admitting defeat, like proving all those people right who said she could not make it alone. "I will manage," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Victoria." Her name on his lips, informal and gentle, made her look up. "I am not asking so I can judge you or tell you to give up. I am asking because I need to know how bad things are if I am going to help. You have already helped more than enough." "That is not an answer," Victoria sighed, setting down her coffee cup. She was tired of pretending, tired of the constant fear and uncertainty. "I have about 2 weeks of food if I am very careful, not much beyond that. My chickens are still laying, but winter will slow that down. I have some money, but not enough to buy everything I need and still pay the filing fees for the claim." Nathan listened without interrupting, his face serious. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "All right. Here is what we are going to do. I need help at the ranch house. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting on in years, and she has been asking for help with the heavier work. Laundry, some of the cooking, that sort of thing. I will pay you a fair wage, and you can take some of your pay in supplies if that works better for you. You come out 3 days a week, keep your claim the other days." Pride warred with desperation in Victoria's chest. "That sounds like charity dressed up as work." "It is not," Nathan said firmly. "Mrs. Chen really does need help, and I really will pay you what the job is worth. If you do not believe me, ask her yourself when you come out. She will tell you exactly what she thinks. That woman does not hold back." Despite herself, Victoria felt a smile tug at her lips. "When would I start?" "Day after tomorrow, if you are up for it." "Give yourself tomorrow to rest and recover from today. I will come by in the morning and drive you out to the ranch, show you around." It was a good offer, more than fair, and Victoria knew she would be foolish to refuse it. Still, accepting felt like crossing some kind of line, like admitting she could not do this alone. Then again, Nathan's words about trade and community echoed in her mind. Maybe being smart meant knowing when to accept help. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you. I will do good work for you, I promise." "I know you will," Nathan said, and the confidence in his voice warmed her more than the stove. He finished his coffee and set down the cup. "I should head back before it gets full dark. Will you be all right here tonight?" "Yes," Victoria said, and for the first time in months she actually believed it. "I will be fine." Nathan pulled on his still damp coat, and Victoria walked him to the door. The rain had indeed led up to a light drizzle, and the temperature seemed to have risen a few degrees. At the door, Nathan paused, looking down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are going to make it, Victoria," he said quietly. "You are stronger than you think. You just need to let yourself lean on others once in a while. That does not make you weak. It makes you smart." Before she could respond, he touched the brim of his hat and stepped out into the fading light. Victoria watched him mount his horse with easy grace, and then he was riding away into the dusk, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. Victoria closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating strangely fast in her chest. She told herself it was just relief, just gratitude for the help he had given. But as she moved through the cabin, tidying up and preparing for bed, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the way Nathan had looked at her, the gentleness in his strong hands, the understanding in his voice. She climbed into bed that night with a full stomach and a warm cabin, and for the first time since her father had died, she felt something that might have been hope. The next day dawned clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Victoria spent the day taking stock of her situation with clearer eyes than she had allowed herself in weeks. The cabin was small but sturdy, her father's handiwork evident in the tight corners and solid roof. The claim itself was 40 acres of mixed timber and meadow, with a good creek running through it that never seemed to run dry. With proper management and enough time, it could be a fine little homestead. She just had to survive long enough to make it work. She mended the tear in Nathan's coat carefully, her stitches small and even. It gave her something to focus on besides the nervous flutter in her stomach when she thought about seeing him again. She told herself she was just anxious about the new job, about working for someone and whether she would be good enough at it. The fact that Nathan's dark eyes and quiet strength kept intruding on her thoughts had nothing to do with anything. True to his word, Nathan arrived mid-morning the next day, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by a matched pair of horses. Victoria was ready, dressed in her best work dress with her hair braided and pinned up neatly. She had wrapped his mended coat in brown paper, and she handed it to him as he helped her up onto the wagon seat. "I did my best with the tear," she said. "It should hold now." Nathan unwrapped the coat and examined her work, his fingers tracing the neat line of stitches. "This is excellent work. Better than it was before it tore, honestly. Thank you." The simple praise warmed Victoria as they set off down the rutted road. The day was bright and cold, the sun glinting off the frost that still clung to the shadowed places. The Sierra foothills rolled around them in shades of gold and brown, the evergreens standing dark against the lighter colors of the oaks and grassland. "It is beautiful country," Victoria said, watching a hawk circle overhead. "It is," Nathan agreed. "Hard but beautiful. I never wanted to be anywhere else, even when things were at their worst." He glanced at her, his expression curious. "Where are you from originally? Your father said you moved here from back east." "Pennsylvania," Victoria said. "My mother died when I was 17, and after that, my father had no reason to stay. He had always wanted to come west, to have land of his own instead of working in someone else's factory. So we saved every penny we could, and 2 years ago, we finally had enough to make the journey. Do you miss it? Pennsylvania, Victoria considered the question. Sometimes I miss what it was when my mother was still alive and we were a complete family, but the place itself. No, my father was right about this country. It is hard, but it is honest. If you are willing to work, you can make something of yourself here. Back east, we would always have been factory workers, never quite making enough to get ahead. Here, we have a chance at something more. Your father taught you to think like a pioneer, Nathan said approvingly. That will serve you well. The ranch, when they reached it, was more impressive than Victoria had expected. The main house was a solid 2-story structure of wood and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Outbuildings dotted the property, all well maintained, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance on the hillsides. Several men worked near the barns, and they tipped their hats to Nathan as the wagon passed. You have a lot of hands, Victoria observed. 6 year-round, and I bring on a few more for spring branding and fall roundup, Nathan said. They are good men, and they know to be respectful. You will not have any trouble from them. He pulled the wagon up to the main house, and before Victoria could climb down, the front door opened and a small, elderly Chinese woman emerged. She stood barely 5 feet tall, but there was such dignity and command in her bearing that Victoria found herself straightening unconsciously. You bring the girl, Mrs. Chen said, her accented English crisp and clear. Good. I am too old for all this washing and scrubbing. My bones hurt. Mrs. Chen, this is Victoria Owens, Nathan said, coming around to help Victoria down from the wagon. Victoria, this is Mrs. Chen. She has been with our family since before I was born, and she runs this household. Nice to meet you, Victoria said, offering her hand. Mrs. Chen took it, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small and elderly. You work hard, Mrs. Chen asked bluntly, studying Victoria with sharp black eyes. Yes, madam. You complain. No, madam. You honest. Yes, madam. Mrs. Chen nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. Nathan needs help choosing what shirt to wear, but good judge of character. You come, I show you what to do. Nathan made a sound that might have been protest at the shirt comment, but Mrs. Chen ignored him, taking Victoria's arm and leading her into the house. You ignore him when he tries to carry everything himself, she said, loud enough for Nathan to definitely hear. Stubborn like his father. Good heart, but stubborn. The house was comfortable and well kept, with sturdy furniture and colorful rag rugs on the wooden floors. Mrs. Chen showed Victoria the kitchen first, a large room with a massive stove and good work surfaces. Then she walked her through the rest of the house, explaining what needed to be done and when. Monday, Wednesday, Friday you come, Mrs. Chen said. 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I pay you $3 a week, plus you take home food. Good food, not scraps. Nathan also will trade work for supplies you need. This fair, $3 a week, was more than fair, it was generous. Combined with the food and supplies, it would be enough to see Victoria through the winter and give her a stake for the spring. More than fair, Victoria said. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. You thank me by doing good work, Mrs. Chen said briskly. Now, today you start. We do laundry. Show me you can work hard as you say. The next several hours proved to be some of the hardest physical work Victoria had ever done. Laundry for a household of men meant hauling water, heating it, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, and hanging. By the time they finished, Victoria's arms ached and her hands were red and raw, but Mrs. Chen nodded with approval. You work good, she said. Not afraid of hard work. This good. You come back Monday, we work more. Nathan drove Victoria home as the sun was setting, the wagon bed now loaded with supplies. There were beans, flour, salt pork, coffee, sugar, and even some dried apples and a tin of condensed milk. Victoria stared at the bounty, her throat tight. "This is too much," she protested. "I only worked 1 day." "Mrs. Chen sets the terms of trade," Nathan said mildly, "and she clearly thinks you earned it. I learned a long time ago not to argue with her about these things." "She is formidable," Victoria said, and Nathan laughed. "That is one word for it. She basically raised me after my mother died, kept the house running, and made sure I did not completely fall apart. I owe her more than I could ever repay." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically. The evening was clear and cold, stars beginning to prick through the darkening sky. Victoria found herself acutely aware of Nathan beside her, the warmth of his body in the cold air, the capable way his hands held the reins. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything. The job, the supplies, the kindness. You did not have to do any of it." "Yes, I did," Nathan said quietly, "because it was the right thing to do and because—" He trailed off, and in the dim light, Victoria thought she saw color rise in his cheeks. "Because I wanted to help you specifically, not just anyone in trouble." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. "Why?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because when I saw you out there in the freezing rain, so stubborn and determined and half dead from cold but still swinging that axe, I thought you were the bravest and most foolish person I had ever seen. And I wanted to know you better. To see what other kinds of stubborn foolishness you might get up to." Despite the seriousness of his tone, Victoria heard the thread of humor in his words, and she found herself laughing. "I am not sure if that is a compliment or an insult." "Both," Nathan said, and now she definitely heard warmth in his voice. "Definitely both." When they reached her cabin, Nathan helped her unload the supplies, carrying the heavy sacks as if they weighed nothing. At her door, he paused, his hat in his hands. "I will see you Monday morning then," he said, "unless you need anything before then." "I will be fine," Victoria assured him. "I have enough wood, and now I have enough food. I am well set." Nathan nodded, but he did not move to leave. In the lamplight spilling from her open door, Victoria could see the planes of his face, the seriousness in his eyes. "Victoria," he said, her name soft on his lips. "I meant what I said, about wanting to know you better. I hope that is all right." Victoria's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was dangerous territory, that letting herself care for someone was a risk she could barely afford. But when she looked at Nathan, at the honesty and kindness in his face, she found she wanted to take that risk. "It is more than all right," she said quietly. The smile that spread across Nathan's face was like sunrise, transforming his serious features into something warm and almost boyish. He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in farewell. "Good night, Victoria. Sleep well." "Good night, Nathan." She watched him ride away into the darkness, and when she finally closed her door, she found herself smiling for no reason at all. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable pattern. Victoria worked at the ranch 3 days a week, learning from Mrs. Chen, and slowly building her strength back up after the desperate months following her father's death. The work was hard but satisfying, and she took pride in the way the house gleamed under her care, the way the meals she helped prepare filled the ranch hands with contentment. On the days she was home, she worked on her own claim, doing the maintenance and preparation needed to survive the winter. True to his word, Nathan often sent 1 or 2 of his hands over to help with the heavier tasks, and Victoria always sent them back with bread or preserves or whatever she could spare. The trade was fair and preserved her dignity, and slowly she began to understand what Nathan had meant about community. But more than the work or the trade, what filled Victoria's thoughts during those weeks was Nathan himself. He found reasons to be around when she was working, often joining her and Mrs. Chen for the midday meal. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the practical matters of ranching and homesteading to books they had read, places they had been, dreams they held for the future. Victoria learned that Nathan was 29, that he loved this land with a fierce passion that matched her own, that he had a dry sense of humor and a tendency to take responsibility for everything and everyone around him. She learned that he read poetry late at night when he could not sleep, that he had a gift for gentling difficult horses, that he believed in treating everyone with dignity regardless of their station or background. And Nathan, she thought, was learning her. He asked questions that made her think, listened to her answers with complete attention, and remembered tiny details she mentioned in passing. He treated her opinions with respect, never dismissing her ideas just because she was a woman or new to this country. When she talked about her plans for her claim, he offered suggestions but never commands, and he seemed to genuinely believe she could succeed. The awareness between them grew like a seed in good soil, slowly but steadily. Victoria found herself dressing with more care on the days she would see him, found her heart beating faster when she heard his voice or saw him riding up. She caught him watching her sometimes, his dark eyes intense and warm, and the way he looked at her made her feel beautiful and strong and valued. Mrs. Chen noticed, of course. Nothing escaped Mrs. Chen. "You like him," the old woman said one afternoon as they kneaded bread together in the warm kitchen. It was not a question. Victoria felt her cheeks heat. "He has been very kind to me." "Bah, kind is what you are to stranger. The way Nathan looks at you is not kind, is something more, Mrs. Chen's gnarled hands worked the dough with practiced efficiency. "He is good man, stubborn but good heart. He would treat woman well, give her good life." "Mrs. Chen," Victoria protested weakly. "What? I am old, I say what I think. You are good woman, he is good man, both too stubborn and lonely. Would be stupid not to see if you fit together." She fixed Victoria with a sharp look. "You afraid?" The question, asked so bluntly, made Victoria pause. Was she afraid? Yes, she realized. She was terrified. Letting herself care for Nathan, letting herself imagine a future with him, felt like setting herself up for heartbreak. What if he did not feel the same way? What if he did, but something happened to him like it happened to her parents? What if she lost her heart and then lost him and had to survive that grief on top of everything else? "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I am afraid." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. "Of course you afraid. Love always scary, but you know what's scarier? Living whole life and never taking chance. Being safe and alone rather than risking being happy." She shaped her dough into a neat loaf and set it aside to rise. "You think on that." Victoria did think on it, her thoughts churning as she worked. By the time Nathan came in for dinner that evening, she had come to a decision. She would not push for anything, would not risk making things awkward between them, but she would also not pull away. If something was growing between them, she would let it grow and see where it led. As if sensing her resolve, Nathan lingered after the meal, offering to drive her home rather than having one of his hands do it. They rode through the early winter darkness, and Nathan was quieter than usual. "Is something wrong?" Victoria asked finally. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been trying to figure out how to ask you something, and I keep talking myself out of it because the timing does not seem right." "What is it?" "The town is having a dance next Saturday night for Christmas. I was wondering if you would accompany me." Victoria's heart leaped into her throat. A dance was not just a dance, not when a man asked a woman to accompany him. It was a public declaration of interest, a statement to the whole town that they were courting. "Yes," she said, the word coming out before she could overthink it. "I would like that very much." She felt more than saw Nathan relax beside her. "Good," he said, and she heard the smile in his voice. "That is very good." The following week passed in a blur of anticipation and nervousness. Victoria had one good dress, the dark blue wool she had worn to her father's funeral, and she spent an evening altering it, adding a bit of lace at the collar and cuffs to make it more festive. She washed her hair with the last of her rose-scented soap, a luxury she had been hoarding, and practiced pinning it up in the styles she had seen in the ladies' magazines at the Mercantile. When Saturday arrived, she was ready hours too early, pacing her small cabin like a caged animal. When she heard Nathan's wagon approaching, she forced herself to take a deep breath and wait by the door rather than rushing out like an eager girl. Nathan had dressed for the occasion in a dark suit that must have been his best, his hair neatly combed and his jaw freshly shaved. When he saw Victoria, something flared in his eyes that made her knees weak. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made the words more precious than any flowery compliment. "Thank you," Victoria managed. "You look very handsome yourself." The ride into Angel's camp was filled with comfortable conversation, but underneath, it ran a current of anticipation. When they arrived at the town hall, already bright with lamplight and loud with music and laughter, Nathan helped Victoria down from the wagon with particular care, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Inside, the hall had been decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and a small band played lively tunes on fiddle, guitar, and banjo. Half the town seemed to be there, and Victoria felt the weight of curious eyes as Nathan led her inside, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. "Nathan Parker," a woman's voice called out, and Victoria turned to see a handsome woman in her 40s approaching, followed by a younger man who bore a strong resemblance to her. "I heard rumors you might actually attend a social event, but I did not believe them." "Margaret," Nathan said with genuine warmth. "Good to see you. Victoria, this is Margaret Sinclair and her son Daniel. They run the ranch on the other side of mine. Margaret, Daniel, this is Victoria Owens." "The woman who is working on the old Owens claim," Margaret said, her sharp eyes assessing Victoria with interest. "I have heard about you. People say you are determined to prove up that land on your own." "I am working on it," Victoria said carefully, unsure if she was being criticized or complimented. Margaret smiled. "Good for you. Too many women let themselves be pushed around or scared off. This country needs more stubborn women who know their own minds." She glanced at Nathan with unmistakable approval. "I like her. Do not mess this up, Nathan." "I will do my best," Nathan said dryly, and Margaret laughed before moving off to greet other friends. The evening passed in a whirl of music and dancing. Nathan was a better dancer than Victoria had expected. Moving with the same easy grace he brought to everything physical. He danced with her for most of the evening, only occasionally partnering with other women when social obligation required it. And Victoria found herself claimed by various men from the town for a few dances. But it was when she was back in Nathan's arms, moving through a waltz as the evening drew toward its close, that Victoria felt most herself. They moved together well, their bodies finding a natural rhythm, and when Nathan looked down at her, his eyes were warm and intent. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, pitched for her ears alone. "About what?" "About how much I look forward to the days you come to the ranch. About how I find excuses to ride past your claim on the days you are home, just to make sure you are all right." about how when I am reading at night, I find myself thinking about what you would think of a particular passage and wishing I could read it to you." Victoria's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must feel it. "Nathan." "I am courting you, Victoria," he said, his voice serious and sure. "I want to make my intentions clear. I care for you, more than I have cared for anyone in a very long time, and I would like permission to call on you properly, to see if what I think is growing between us is real." "It is real," Victoria said, the words coming straight from her heart. "And yes, you have my permission. I care for you too, Nathan, more than is probably wise." The smile that lit his face was worth every risk, every fear. He pulled her closer, right to the edge of what was proper, and Victoria let herself relax into his embrace as they finished the waltz. Around them, she was aware of people watching, of whispers and knowing smiles, but she found she did not care. For the first time since her father had died, she felt like she belonged somewhere with someone. The drive home was slower than necessary, both of them reluctant to end the evening. Nathan's arm rested along the back of the wagon seat, not quite touching her but close enough that Victoria could feel his warmth. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Tell me something about yourself I do not know," Nathan said. Victoria thought for a moment. "I always wanted to learn to ride properly," she admitted. "My father and I could not afford to keep horses back east, and we sold ours when we settled the claim to buy other supplies. But I miss it, the freedom of it." "I will teach you," Nathan said immediately. "I have a mare that would be perfect for you, gentle but with enough spirit to keep things interesting." "I could not take one of your horses. Not take, borrow, or we could call it part of your wages, riding lessons in exchange for work." Nathan glanced at her, his eyes glinting with humor. "Or you could just accept that I want to do this for you because it would make you happy, and making you happy makes me happy." Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" They reached her cabin too soon, and Nathan walked her to the door, his presence solid and comforting in the darkness. At the threshold, he took both her hands in his, looking down at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said. "You made me happier than I have been in years." "You make me happy too," Victoria whispered. Nathan lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was both respectful and intimate. "Good night, Victoria. I will see you Monday." "Good night, Nathan." She watched him drive away, touching her fingers to her lips as if she could transfer the warmth of his kiss there. Inside her cabin, she danced a few steps by herself, hugging the memory of the evening close. The winter deepened, bringing snow to the high country and cold rain to Angel's Camp, but Victoria had never felt warmer. Nathan called on her every Sunday afternoon, their official courting time, and they spent those hours talking and laughing and learning each other. He brought her books from his collection, and they discussed them at length. She taught him to make the flaky pastries her mother had learned from a French neighbor in Pennsylvania, and he declared them the best thing he had ever eaten. True to his word, he also gave her riding lessons on a pretty sorrel mare named Ginger. Victoria took to it quickly, her body remembering more than her mind from the few times she had ridden as a child. Soon, she was cantering across the meadows near the ranch, her laughter ringing out as the wind whipped past her face, and Nathan riding beside her with a look of pure contentment. Mrs. Chen watched their courtship with approval, occasionally offering cryptic comments about weddings and grandchildren that made both Nathan and Victoria blush. The ranch hands treated Victoria with friendly respect, and she came to know them by name and personality. Life took on a rhythm that felt right, balanced between independence and connection, solitude and community. Christmas came and went in a warm glow. Victoria spent Christmas Eve at the ranch, joining Nathan and Mrs. Chen and the hands for a feast that Mrs. Chen had been preparing for days. Nathan gave her a beautiful woolen shawl, soft and warm, and she gave him a leather bookmark she had tooled with a pattern of oak leaves. They exchanged the gifts shyly, both of them aware of the weight of the gesture, the promise implicit in giving something so personal. On Christmas morning, Nathan drove her to the small church in town, and they sat together during the service, their shoulders touching. Afterward, he took her to his mother's grave in the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. "I wanted her to meet you," he said simply, standing with his hat in his hands. "I think she would have liked you very much. She always said I needed someone who would not let me be too serious, who would make me laugh and keep me from turning into a hermit." Victoria laid a small wreath of pine boughs on the grave, touched by his trust in bringing her to this sacred place. "I wish I could have known her, so do I." Nathan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But I am grateful I know you. You have made this winter the best I have had in years." They stood together in the cold winter sunlight, and Victoria felt the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. January brought bitter cold and a week of hard storms that kept everyone close to home. Victoria worried about her claim, about whether the cabin roof would hold under the weight of the snow, but Nathan and his hands rode over as soon as the weather cleared to check on her and help dig out. Her cabin had weathered the storm well, her father's solid construction proving its worth, and Victoria felt a surge of pride and gratitude. The weeks passed, and January gave way to February. Victoria's feelings for Nathan deepened with every passing day, moving beyond simple affection into something richer and more complex. She loved his quiet strength, his dry humor, the way he treated everyone with respect and dignity. She loved how he listened to her ideas about improving her claim and offered suggestions without ever taking over or dismissing her plans. She loved the way he looked at her, as if she were precious and strong at the same time. And she thought, based on the way he looked at her, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or shoulder, the way his voice softened when he said her name, that he might love her too on Valentine's Day, Nathan asked her to take a ride with him after her work at the ranch was done. They rode out to a high meadow on his property, a place where the view stretched for miles across the foothills. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and deep purple. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Nathan said as they dismounted. "I come here when I need to think, or when I want to remember why I work so hard to keep this land." "It is beautiful," Victoria said, turning in a slow circle to take in the vista. "Victoria." Nathan's voice made her turn back to him. He stood a few feet away, his hat in his hands, his expression serious and nervous at the same time. "I need to tell you something, and I am not sure I have the right words for it." Victoria's heart began to pound. She took a step toward him. "You can tell me anything." "I love you," Nathan said, the words simple and devastating. "I have probably loved you since that first day when you were too stubborn to come in from the freezing rain. You are brave and strong and smart, and you make me laugh, and you make me want to be a better man. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you if you will have me." Joy flooded through Victoria, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, I love you too, Nathan. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you took that axe out of my hands and told me to get inside." Nathan closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, pulling her into his arms. For a moment, they just held each other, and Victoria felt like she had finally come home. Then Nathan pulled back just enough to look down at her, his eyes searching her face. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Victoria whispered. His kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, his lips warm against hers. Then Victoria rose on her toes and wrapped her arms around his neck, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent and real. Nathan's arms tightened around her, one hand sliding up to cup the back of her head, and Victoria poured all her love and trust and hope into the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not been courting long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Victoria. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Victoria said again, laughing through happy tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Nathan kissed her again and then again, as if he could not quite believe she was real. Finally, he pulled back and reached into his pocket, drawing out a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my grandmother's," he said as he slid it onto her finger. "My mother gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I loved. I think she would be happy it is going to you." Victoria looked at the ring through her tears, watching it catch the last light of the setting sun. "It is perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect." They rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, hands clasped between them, making plans and dreaming out loud. They would marry in the spring, they decided, giving Victoria time to prepare and allowing them to have a longer engagement for propriety's sake. Victoria would keep her claim, working it with Nathan's help, building it into something productive that could eventually be passed down to their children. She would also continue to help Mrs. Chen, becoming part of the ranch household while maintaining her independence. Mrs. Chen wept openly when they told her, which Victoria had not known the stern old woman was capable of. She hugged them both fiercely and declared that she would make the wedding feast herself, and heaven help anyone who tried to interfere with her plans. The news spread through Angel's camp quickly, and to Victoria's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Margaret Sinclair declared that she had seen it coming from the night of the Christmas dance, and that Nathan had finally shown some sense. Even Tom Hendricks, the land agent who had pressured Victoria to sell, offered his congratulations, though Victoria suspected he was relieved to no longer feel obligated to keep checking on her. The weeks between their engagement and their wedding in early April were some of the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Nathan spent as much time together as work would allow, learning each other in deeper ways, discussing their hopes and fears and dreams for their future. Nathan took her to meet some of his extended family, cousins who lived in Sacramento, and they welcomed her warmly into the fold. Victoria worked on her claim with renewed energy, knowing now that she would have Nathan's full support in making it succeed. Together they planned out what crops to plant, where to expand the cabin eventually, how to improve the water system. Nathan never took over, always treating it as her land and her decisions, but his experience and advice were invaluable. Spring came early that year, the wildflowers blooming in profusion across the hillsides. Victoria's wedding day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony they had planned in the meadow near her cabin. It seemed fitting to marry there, on the land that had brought them together, with the community who had supported them gathered as witnesses. Victoria dressed in a new gown of pale ivory silk, a gift from Nathan that she had protested was too extravagant until she had seen the look in his eyes when she tried it on. Mrs. Chen had helped her with her hair, pinning it up with small white roses, and Margaret Sinclair had lent her a delicate lace veil that had been in her family for generations. As Victoria walked through the meadow toward where Nathan waited, her hand resting on Mrs. Chen's arm, since the old woman had insisted on giving her away, she felt her heart swell with joy. Nathan stood tall and handsome in his best suit, his eyes locked on her with such love and intensity that she felt tears prick at her eyes. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, conducted by the circuit preacher who served the scattered communities in the foothills. They exchanged vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor and support each other through whatever trials life might bring. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Nathan cupped Victoria's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and precious. The celebration that followed was everything a wedding should be, full of good food, music, and dancing. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the feast, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. The townspeople had contributed as well, everyone bringing something to share in the joy of the day. As the sun set and the dancing continued by lamplight and firelight, Nathan pulled Victoria away from the festivities, leading her to the edge of the meadow where they could have a moment of relative privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Parker?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Victoria said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I keep thinking about that day you found me chopping wood in the freezing rain. I was so angry that you took over, so determined to prove I did not need anyone. And now I know that needing someone does not make you weak, it makes you human, and I am so grateful that the someone I need is you." Nathan turned her in his arms, looking down at her with eyes full of love. "I am the grateful one. You took a bitter, lonely man and reminded him how to hope, how to dream, how to love. You are my partner, my equal, my best friend, and now my wife. I promise you, Victoria, I will spend every day of my life trying to make you as happy as you make me." "You already do," Victoria whispered, and then his lips were on hers, and the rest of the world faded away. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, the space transformed by Nathan's quiet preparations. He had brought over fine linens for the bed, hung curtains at the windows, and filled the room with candles that cast everything in a soft, romantic glow. He made love to her with a tenderness and passion that took her breath away, his hands reverent on her skin, his voice murmuring words of love and devotion. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Victoria felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what it meant to be truly known and loved, to give yourself to another person and receive them in return. She traced idle patterns on Nathan's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her fingers. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, his voice drowsy and content. "About how everything changed because of a rainstorm," Victoria said. "About how if it had not been raining that day, you might never have ridden past. We might never have met." "I think we would have met eventually," Nathan said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Some things are meant to be. You are meant to be mine, and I am meant to be yours. The universe would have found a way." Victoria smiled against his skin. "That is very romantic for a practical rancher. You bring out my romantic side." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Among other things." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Victoria's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had finally found where she belonged. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and joys. Victoria and Nathan worked their lands together, combining their efforts and resources to build something substantial. Her claim proved even more valuable than expected when they discovered a vein of gold on the property. Not enough to make them wealthy, but enough to provide a comfortable cushion and allow them to expand their operations. Nathan built an addition onto the cabin, giving them more space while preserving the heart of the structure that held so many memories. Victoria divided her time between their two properties, managing both with skill and determination. She gained a reputation as a shrewd businesswoman, her advice sought by other women trying to establish themselves in the territory. Mrs. Chen lived to the venerable age of 87, presiding over the ranch household with vigor almost until the end. When she passed peacefully in her sleep, Victoria and Nathan mourned her deeply, grateful for the years they had been able to share with her and for the wisdom she had imparted. Their children came in time, 3 of them spaced across the years. First came Samuel Nathan, named for Victoria's father and his, a sturdy boy with his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength. 2 years later came Rose Margaret, named for the wildflowers that bloomed in their meadow and the friend who had welcomed Victoria so warmly. The youngest, born when Victoria was 30, was James Thomas, a laughing child who brought joy wherever he went. Victoria proved to be a natural mother, firm but loving, teaching her children to work hard and think independently. Nathan was a devoted father, patient and kind, leading by example rather than harsh words. Together they raised their children to value honesty, integrity, and community, to respect the land and the people who worked it. As their children grew, Victoria found time to pursue other interests. She became involved in efforts to establish a proper school in Angels Camp, serving on the school board and advocating for quality education for all children, regardless of their parents' means. She also began writing articles about homesteading and women's experiences in the West, her words published in newspapers throughout California. Nathan expanded his ranching operations, bringing on more hands and diversifying into horse breeding. His horses gained a reputation for quality and temperament, sought after throughout the territory. He served for a time as town marshal, his fairness and level-headedness making him well-suited to resolving disputes and keeping the peace. Through it all, their love for each other remained the foundation of everything they built. They still found time for Sunday rides through the hills, for quiet evenings reading together by the fire, for stolen moments of intimacy and connection amidst the demands of work and family. Nathan still looked at Victoria with the same intensity he had shown that first day, and Victoria still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her in that particular way that was hers alone. When Samuel Nathan turned 18, he took over primary management of Victoria's original claim, proving it up in his own name and beginning to build his own legacy. Rose showed talent as an artist, her paintings of the Sierra landscape gaining recognition and beginning to sell. James decided to study law, determined to use his education to help protect the rights of small landowners and miners against the encroachment of big corporations. Victoria and Nathan watched their children grow and flourish with pride and satisfaction, knowing they had given them the tools to make their own way in the world. As their hair grayed and their faces lined with the marks of years well lived, they found new appreciation for the quieter pleasures of life. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house one evening, watching the sun set over the hills, when Nathan reached over and took Victoria's hand. They were both in their early 50s now, their children grown and building lives of their own, and the evening was peaceful and warm. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Giving up your independence, marrying me instead of proving up your claim alone?" Victoria looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" "Because I know how important it was to you to prove you could make it on your own. I have always worried that you felt like I took that away from you." Victoria squeezed his hand, her heart aching with love for this man who still, after all these years, worried about her happiness above his own. "You did not take anything from me, Nathan. You gave me everything. Yes, it was important to prove I could survive alone. But what I learned was that surviving alone and living fully are two different things. You taught me that accepting help and love does not mean giving up who you are. It means becoming more than you could be alone." "I could say the same about you," Nathan said softly. "You took a man who was turning hard and isolated and reminded him how to live, how to love, how to be part of something larger than himself. Then we saved each other," Victoria said, "and we built something beautiful together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Victoria thought about that day so many years ago, when she had been chopping wood in the freezing rain, half frozen and too stubborn to admit she needed help. She thought about the moment Nathan had taken the axe from her hands and ordered her inside, how angry and grateful she had been at the same time. That single moment had changed the trajectory of her entire life. It had led to love, to partnership, to a family and a home and a legacy that would outlive them both. It had taught her that strength came not from refusing help, but from knowing when to accept it. That independence meant having the freedom to choose connection rather than being forced into isolation. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, the same question he had asked her on their wedding night and countless times since. "About freezing rain," Victoria said with a smile, "and stubborn women, and cowboys who know when to take charge." Nathan laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Best decision I ever made, taking that axe from you." "Best decision I ever made was letting you," Victoria replied. He pulled her closer, and she leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him and the steady beat of his heart. Around them, the ranch settled into evening rhythms, the sounds of horses and cattle, of wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl. This was home, this place they had built together out of determination and love and stubborn refusal to give up. The years continued to pass, marked by grandchildren and continued prosperity. Samuel Nathan married a schoolteacher named Caroline, and they gave Victoria and Nathan 3 grandchildren to dote on. Rose married a fellow artist and settled in San Francisco but visited often, bringing her own children to run wild through the meadows Victoria and Nathan loved. James brought his law practice back to Angels Camp after graduating, determined to serve the community that had raised him, and eventually married the daughter of the local doctor. Victoria and Nathan grew old together with grace and gratitude, their love deepening rather than fading with the years. They celebrated their silver anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them, and then their 40th anniversary, and then their 50th, a rare achievement that made them the darlings of the county. When Nathan was 78 and Victoria 71, he developed a sudden illness that the doctors could not cure. Victoria nursed him through those final weeks with tenderness and devotion, and when he passed, he did so peacefully, holding her hand and telling her he loved her one last time. The grief nearly broke her, this loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But she was surrounded by the family they had built together, by the community they had served, by the legacy of love and commitment they had established. She knew Nathan would want her to live fully for however much time remained to her, to continue to find joy and purpose. Victoria lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged until almost the very end. She finally passed at 79, peacefully in her sleep, and the entire town turned out for her funeral. She was buried next to Nathan on the hill overlooking the ranch, and their children saw to it that their headstone bore a simple inscription: Victoria and Nathan Parker. They chose love. The properties they had worked so hard to build remained in the family for generations, passed down through careful stewardship. and the values Victoria and Nathan had instilled in their children. The story of how they met, of the cowboy who found a stubborn woman chopping wood in freezing rain and knew immediately she was meant to be his, became family legend, told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And in the meadow where they had married, where they had shared their first kiss and made their promises to each other, wildflowers continued to bloom each spring, a reminder that even in the hardest country, even in the coldest storms, love could take root and flourish and create something beautiful that would last long after the rain had passed. Their love story had begun with a simple act of kindness, with Nathan taking an axe from frozen hands and commanding a stubborn woman to get inside. But it had grown into something magnificent, a partnership built on respect and trust and deep, abiding love. They had faced challenges and hardships, but they had faced them together, and in doing so, they had created a life richer than either could have built alone. In the end, that was the true legacy of Victoria and Nathan Parker. Not the land they had accumulated or the prosperity they had built, but the example they had set of what love could be when two people committed to building something together, when they chose partnership over pride, connection over isolation, and love over fear. Their story proved that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone take the axe from your hands when you are too stubborn to stop chopping, and having the wisdom to let them. Sometimes strength means accepting help. Sometimes independence means having the freedom to choose interdependence. And sometimes, in the cold rain of a November day, you can meet the person who will change your life forever, if only you are brave enough to let them in. Years turned to decades, and the memory of Victoria and Nathan became woven into the fabric of Angel's Camp itself. The school Victoria had fought to establish flourished, educating generations of children. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, still bearing the Parker name with pride. The cabin where they had first kissed, where Nathan had carried Victoria over the threshold as his bride, was preserved as a family treasure, a tangible reminder of where their story had truly begun. On winter days when freezing rain swept through the Sierra foothills, when the weather turned bitter and dangerous, people in Angel's Camp would remember Victoria and Nathan's story. They would remember that sometimes help comes in unexpected forms, that pride should never keep you from accepting kindness, and that the best love stories begin not with grand gestures but with simple moments of human connection and care. The sapphire ring Nathan had given Victoria, his grandmother's ring, was passed down through the women of the family, each new generation wearing it as a symbol of commitment and enduring love. And with the ring came the story, told over and over so it would never be forgotten, so that future generations would understand what real love looked like, how it grew and deepened and lasted through everything life could throw at it. In the town cemetery, where Nathan and Victoria rested side by side, their graves were never without flowers. Family members tended them faithfully, and even strangers would sometimes leave a bloom, touched by the story of their love, inspired by their example of partnership and devotion. The legacy they left was not measured in acres or wealth, though they had accumulated both. It was measured in the values they had passed down, in the strength of the family they had created, in the community they had built and served. It was measured in the example they had set of choosing love over fear, of building bridges instead of walls, of facing life's challenges together rather than alone. Their story became a touchstone for the community, proof that even in the hard country of the American West, even in times of struggle and uncertainty, love could flourish and create something lasting and beautiful. They had been two people from different circumstances, who had found each other in a moment of need and had built from that moment a lifetime of love and partnership. And so the story of the cowboy who found a woman chopping wood in freezing rain, who took the axe and said, "Get inside right now," who saw past her stubbornness to her strength, past her pride to her need, and who loved her for exactly who she was, lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create legacies that echo through generations. In the end, Victoria and Nathan Parker's story was simple but profound. They had loved each other deeply and truly, had built a life together based on mutual respect and support, had raised children who carried their values forward, and had left the world better than they had found it. They had proved that the best love stories are not about grand passion alone, but about daily choice, about showing up for each other again and again, about building something together that neither could have built alone. Their story was a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest moments, that life can change in an instant if you are brave enough to let it, and that the truest strength lies not in stubborn independence, but in the willingness to lean on another and let them lean on you in return. And somewhere in the hills above Angel's Camp, where the wildflowers still bloom each spring and the wind carries whispers of the past, the love of Victoria and Nathan Parker continues to live on, eternal and true, a beacon for all who come after them seeking to build their own legacies of love.